Like a trusted turnout jacket you've had for years, Flex 7 outer shell fabric delivers a perfectly broken-in feel on the very first wear. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of Enforce technology, Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit tenkatafabrics.com/flex7. Flex 7, powered by Enforce technology. Only from Tenkata Protective Fabrics.
Welcome to Tailboard Talk with
Chris Rasmussen,
Craig Nelson, and Jeff Wallen. Every month we explore different topics of interest to you, our cohorts in fire and emergency services. So whether you sit back and listen, sound off on the message board, or call in live to be part of the conversation, we welcome you to join us in our mission to improve the fire service for those we serve and those we serve beside. Now coming to you live from the Great White North, this is Tailboard Talk on Fire Engineering Talk Radio.
Good evening and welcome to Tailboard Talk. This is Craig.
And Chris.
It's kind of a big week right now. FDIC week is going on. Just in case you didn't know about it, I don't know that there'd be anybody in the fire service that wouldn't know this is going on.
Right. So we'll be broadcasted on Friday night, but it's a little earlier in the week, so we're recording the show. And I saw today that it's a big training day there. So I'm kind of disappointed to be missing it, but I'm excited for those individuals that are there, getting some great hands-on training. So I look forward to hearing the stories when they come back to our department and tell us what they did.
I do too.
Maybe not all the stories, but the good training.
I wish we were recording there. Maybe next year, maybe sometime soon, right, in the near future. Be good to see a lot of the old friends and catch up with everybody. Anyways, I don't normally we do our weather portion, and we're gonna probably skip that this evening just because I know our older listeners will be a little disappointed because they really enjoy that. That's maybe why we enjoy it so much. But we have a really special guest this evening, and we really want to give him the time more so than this small talk stuff. So with that, I think we'd like to bring on our guest this evening. Our guest is Monte Fronk, and he's got a special story to tell, and this is kind of a big topic right now. And so with that, Monte, I'm going to kind of let you do the bulk of your introduction here. You've got such a long record and such a long history in the emergency services, emergency management, the fire service, working with law enforcement. So kind of would love to hear you do your introduction.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to Tailboard Talk. My story, this story I'm going to tell you, you never know, as we say for Indian country, where your moccasins end up at. And it just so happened that I was doing a Red Cross presentation, and I met one of your deputy chiefs and asked me to say, and I remembered your session here very much, listen to you all the time. And wouldn't you know, here we are. So things happen for a reason. These gifts happen, for us. And this is what I'm coming to you tonight for. And just as we look at FDIC is a big thing going on right now. In May is also an important month for all of Indian country. And that is the 580 federally recognized tribes and our very large urban native populations, as you see in Fargo-Moorhead. And that is our awareness for missing and murdered our Indigenous relatives, day and month of May. And that is why, and that is my story, is, as you said, I am a Native first responder. I have served the Mille Lacs Band for 35 years. I'm a firefighter, EMT, and emergency manager. And I am also, unfortunately, the father of a missing and murdered Indigenous relative, as in my daughter. My daughter, Nada, her Ojibwe name is Akwadizi Nishka Ishkadid Ikwe. It means she's a fierce, passionate woman. And that Ojibwe name was so fitting to how my daughter was. For myself, I'll introduce you in my traditional Ojibwe language, as we were always offered to do, which is Bozu, Awan Inhindagas, Monte Fronk Indigo, Mille Lacs Band Indujiba, Chiminising Inda, Iwadi Dash Tribal Emergency Management Indinoke, and Mapwadudum. Bozu means hello. Awan is my traditional Ojibwe name. It means the fog. And as a firefighter, I think it was a unique thing. I never understood why the late Jimmy Jackson gave me that traditional name. But as you said, becoming a firefighter, we know that the fog is so important to our survival. And I can remember my first controlled burn going in and using that fog nozzle and creating that fog in there and just having a chill run down my back, thinking that, that this traditional spiritual leader gave me that name. And, the fog is my protector, but we know also in the fire service, it also brings us out alive also. So that's a very special name. I work for the Mille Lacs Band. We are one of the 11 sovereign nations in Minnesota. We are the Ojibwe people. We are the woods and water people, as we are told. And I live in District 2A Chiminising, which is on the southeast corner of Lake Mille Lacs, a little town called Isle next to it. And I belong to the clan of Mukwa or Bear. As Ojibwe people, we all belong to animal clans. And the clan of Mukwa or Bear is seen as a protector clan. So, my moccasins have definitely traveled into what my clan has given me to be a protector of my community and being a tribal first responder. But with that, the reason why we are gathering here tonight is also to bring to the fire service, to our brothers and sisters in the fire service, the awareness that the role you play in this epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous relatives is more critical than ever. Whether you're strictly fire, whether you're EMS fire-based, or emergency management mixed in. This is an epidemic that has plagued Indian country since first contact. With my story, my daughter Nada, or as I said, her traditional Ojibwe name, was one as she maturing in life, we started to see in our household certain behaviors that were starting to come out. Luckily, the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe's behavioral health was really providing all of us tribal government employees a lot of training in identifying what we now call second generational fetal alcohol syndrome children. First generation was ones we saw that had certain facial features. They had no lines on their hands. And some of the behaviors we would see in this first generation were almost like the Russian orphan children you read about in past articles, and stories about when they were adopted by, maybe American families. Second generational fetal alcohol syndrome is one where the birth mother had used alcohol during her pregnancy, but stopped enough to not cause the amount of damage that first generational did. But with second generational, where the damage takes place is in the frontal lobe of the young child. And what it does is it permanently damages that frontal lobe, and that controls the ability for impulse control and decision making. And as my daughter matured, we started seeing these outbursts of behaviors in our home. And it got to the point where, we would have to deal with issues of behavioral outburst to the point where we had to call, EMS, tribal law enforcement to our home. And there's nothing like seeing your brothers and sisters having to watch you wrestle your own daughter to keep her safe and to keep your family safe for the betterment of your home. And all your neighbors and friends who will say to you, we would love to babysit your daughter. We would love to help her raise her and be in her life. But when they start seeing your daughter being taken out on a stretcher, fully restrained, screaming and kicking at the top of her lungs with, 1 or 2 squad cars at your house and the ambulance there, everybody who says they are going to be there basically flees because they don't know what to do or how to handle these behavioral outbreaks. And the one thing that second generational fetal alcohol syndrome kids will never do, and that is to own their behaviors. And when you look at, I'm also a YFPI certified specialist with Minnesota. When you look at like youth fire setting, these type of children will never own their behaviors. They will look at it as somebody else's, fault, and they will continue to live that way their entire life. We had to make, at about 10 years old, a heart-wrenching decision for the safety of our family. And that is we had to look at out-of-home placement for my daughter because we just could not keep her safe in our home. When she would outburst, she would come at us with knives in the kitchen, and it really became a safety issue. Yep. And with that, we had to have a courtesy case management because her mother was a county social worker, and so another county assumed her case management. The problem we ran into is that there is, at that time, and really till this current day, there is really no place for these children to go to because they are highly functional. They act normal. They look absolutely normal in life. But the thing they don't have and they will never regain is impulse control. So they weren't made to go into like a locked behavioral health unit. They weren't chemically dependent, and we couldn't send them there. So my daughter went from facility to facility to facility all over Minnesota. And as she got placement and she got frustrated, and they weren't meeting her needs, Nada's typical reaction was to run and to leave that facility. Many times they were able to go and find her and bring her back to the facility. But as she got a little more mature in life, she knew she had relatives in the cities. And a lot of times that's where she would try to go. And when she would do this and we could not find her, there was such limited resources. And at that time, what we really utilized was the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC. And I will tell our brothers and sisters in the fire service or EMS or in emergency management, that is an absolutely amazing resource. And please remember that. If you are dealing with a lost child or a missing child, they are an absolute resources in many ways. But also what I had was our brother and sisterhood. A cousin of mine who in fact, unfortunately just passed away into the spirit world would always remind me. He would say, "Cousin, you have to remember one important thing, and that you have a fraternity that no other Native family has. You have a fraternity of public safety, fire, EMS, emergency management. And every time your daughter ran, and you're thinking about she's going down into the Twin Cities metro area, every fire station I could think of, a Minneapolis fire, every EMS, Hennepin County, St. Paul, any brother and sister we had was more than willing to say, give us her photo, Monte. We'll put it up in our ambulance bays. We'll put it up in our apparatus bays. We'll put it up in our EOCs. So if we're out and we are dealing with patient care or we come in contact with her, we're there. Where so many of our families in Indian country have to rely on that first initial public safety contact. And we know all across public safety, we're all short-staffed. And especially it's critical in our tribal nations, as well as in our large urban areas, that the person who comes to that front door, whether it's a BIA, tribal police officer, a tribal police officer, a county sheriff, or a metropolitan city police officer, a suburban police officer, comes to that door, what they may receive for customer service is always varying because of short-staffed, how many calls they have pending, and sometimes Native families feel just like I wasn't listened to. The responder came to my door. I said I have a missing relative or a missing child. They take down the report, and whether they do anything with it, maybe not. Where my cousin reminded me that my brothers and sisters in public safety were always willing to keep an eye out. And that is something where most of our Indigenous families don't have. And I never realized that until this process was happening in my life. At one time, she was actually placed into a foster home by a city called by St. Cloud, Minnesota. And this is after multiple placements. And in her ability to be creative, she actually got on the North Star line and actually went down to the urban area of Minneapolis. I knew a lieutenant on the transit police department. I gave him a call. I said, hey, my daughter is a signed runaway. She's on the North Star. She's coming down to Minneapolis. Could you please send an officer to, get her in custody and to keep her safe? And we'll contact her social worker to do what the next step is. Hey, my brother, sure, we'll get down there. Sure enough, they got down. They found her on the train, brought her down to Metro Transit headquarters. Now, this was on a Friday. And they called her social worker at about 4:20 in the afternoon on a Friday. The social worker answers, well, it's 4:20, it's Friday. Just take the handcuffs off her and let her go. I'll deal with it on Monday. And the lieutenant said, excuse me? She is a signed runaway. We have her in custody. What are you going to do to provide care for her? The worker said, well, it's 4:25. I'm done at 4:30. So, just take the handcuffs off her. I'll deal with it on Monday. And she, it's like, ma'am, we have this young lady in custody. She is a signed runaway. You are in charge of her care. Now it's about 4:30. And she goes, well, it's 4:30. I'm done for the day. Unhandcuff her, let her go, and I'll deal with it. And again, they pleaded to say, hey, she is a signed runaway. You are her case manager. You have to do something. And she just said, take the cuffs off. And that's what they did. And that just said right there that all this social worker saw was another Native family. It wasn't that this family had myself, but that time about a 25-year responder with multiple certifications and a master's degree. It didn't matter. all she saw that we were a native family that wasn't worth her time. And all of a sudden, we had no idea where at that time, my 14-year-old daughter went. A few weeks later, at that time, Minneapolis and the city of St. Paul had human trafficking investigators. And the Minneapolis investigator gave me a call and said, "Hey, Monte, I don't know how to tell you this, but we are seeing your daughter being advertised in adult sections like Backpage or other adult social medias for sex. We don't know where she is at. At that time, the technology wasn't there to really determine what her location was. But that, in human speak, said that my 14-year-old daughter was being human trafficked." And we continually saw her being advertised basically for sale for 2 years. What I was told was that as long as you are seeing her, she is alive. We don't know where. We don't know where she's being human trafficked, but she is alive. At this time, we also had the Jacob Wedling Foundation involved in my daughter's case. And I'll tell you, Patty Wedling is an absolute amazing woman who has gone in her own journey. When I met her, I reminded her when I started my career in October, was when Jacob was taking her son. And I can remember the teletypes coming out back then. We actually had teletypes coming out reporting that her son was taken. And Patty was an absolute amazing woman and advocate to have. She would just call me up and say, if anything, how are you doing? And reminding me that as long as we see your daughter being advertised, we know she's alive. Plus, at that time, there was other tribal advocates who were just coming into this movement of missing and murdered Indigenous women who were also assisting. At 16 years old, my daughter's adult social media, her Backpage ads, and other locations stopped. And weeks turned into months, and months turned into a year. And I finally had to ask Patty Wedling of the Jacob Wedling Foundation, with your experiences, when it has been almost a year and there has been no contact, no social media postings, what should I be thinking about in my mind, Patty? And Patty, being Patty, was so honest and from the heart. And as hard as this is to hear, she informed me that I better start thinking and planning for a funeral. And that's what my mind did. My mind as a Native father was a traditional Ojibwe funeral. Ojibwe Native men pallbearers, who's going to be your spiritual advisor, our center, our cemetery. And about a year out, as you listen to a podcast from Columbia Heights Police Department, is Columbia Heights, during a snow emergency, had impounded a number of vehicles. And while they're doing inventory, they unfortunately came across in a trunk basically a deceased young woman whose description was very close to my daughter's. And like we know, I knew an officer in Columbia Heights Police Department. I called him up and just said, my daughter's missing. It's been almost a year. I can send you her picture. If it's my daughter, Nada, I will come down and identify her frozen body. And I will tell you as a father, that is the longest 5 minutes of my life. When the officer came on the phone, like there was this long pause. And he said, Monte, it's not your daughter. Which, and part of me was grateful for, but I knew there was going to be another adult, a mother, and a father who was going to get the worst news of their life from what they found. It was almost going on, almost close to 2 years now, and there was nothing. I received a call from the St. Paul Police Department human trafficking investigator. He said, Monte, I don't want you to get your hopes up, but there might have been a sighting of your daughter in our city. What they could tell me was a flower shop had just sold some flowers to a young lady, and something clicked for that flower shop owner after this young lady left. And what it was that flower shop owner had my daughter's national, nitmic poster in her flower shop, and something clicked. She called 911, and the investigator said, we have an address. We're going to go over and check it out. And again, he said, we don't know, Monte. I'm not going to tell you to hold hopes, but we're going over this residence to check it out. Now, whatever they said, but what I was told that this was a non-English speaking home from what I was told, a Hispanic home. A young lady had opened the door. The investigator and several St. Paul police officers were there. He showed this young lady my daughter's nitmic poster, and by her body language, something wasn't right. I don't know what they said, but they got into that house. And like law enforcement does, this is about their safety. This was a felony search. This was weapons out. This was clearing each room. And they had cleared their first floor and nothing. They went down to the basement, which was a large game room and some additional bedrooms. And again, officer safety, felony search, weapons out. They were clearing rooms. And a younger street officer just happened to look behind a couch. And he saw a pair of shoes standing vertical. And shoes don't do that on their own. They did what good officers do. They kicked the couch away, weapons drawn, show me your hands, show me your hands, show me your hands. And they cuffed this person right away for their safety, as good protocols probably always do. They sat this person up, and the word I got, which was, it's your daughter. And she is alive. We have her at our station. but she is absolutely saying nothing what happened to her. And that is a trait that is so common in victims of human trafficking, and especially in our Indigenous Native world. They don't say anything. My daughter was 17, and we did find a next placement for her. Actually, it was a group home up in Bemidji, Minnesota, which was for older teen girls who were going to about age out of the system. And she actually did very well there. She went to an alternative school in Bemidji. And one day, something just inside of her said, I need to talk to somebody. And there happened to be a SRO at the alternative school. And my daughter went to this SRO and started to tell what had happened to her. This officer knew that he was not trained for this type of interview, but he had an investigator who was trained at Corner House, which is about the best place to learn to interview, women and children of sexual violence or domestic violence. Plus, they had a facility called Hope House, which was a center for interviewing victims of physical or sexual assault or other physical crimes like this. Most times my daughter was in a typical interrogation room, and it is a place where she would never any response whatsoever. Now, this investigator thought that my daughter would probably start telling a few things and it would be maybe a quick interview. But whatever clicked within my daughter's, her soul and her heart said, I need to tell the entire story. And to this investigator's, surprise, she just talked for almost 6 hours straight. One day and almost up to 4 hours the following day. And she gave a full description of what happened to her during her 2 years of being human trafficked. She wasn't 18 yet, and I did get her a report of the interview. And I'll tell you again, as a father, no father should ever read a detailed, graphic description of physical and sexual harm that has been done to your daughter. Granted, we in the fire service, we in the EMS service, we have seen and had to write down many reports of probably things like this. But when it's your own child and your own daughter, it is much different than writing about somebody else's. My daughter, Nada, did not finish school up in Bemidji, and she became 18 years old, and she wanted to start to try to live life on her own, and she wanted to live in the Minneapolis area to do that. And on her own, she realized that she needed to complete her education. She found through Hennepin Technical College up in Brooklyn Center, I believe, that they had a program that allowed young adults who did not finish high school to go and take classes to actually get their high school diploma. It was for ages 18 to 24. We did not know she was doing this, but my daughter's, her name, she's a fierce, passionate woman, was so true. Her fierceness said, I am going to succeed. I am going to finish my educational journey. And on her own, surviving all this trauma, she actually completed this program. And we had planned to go down and to see her graduate. And she just got into a funk and just said, I do not want you there. This is my accomplishment. I want to do this on my own. And in Indian country, high school graduations, and even in the urban areas, is still a very big accomplishment. And as her father, I was not going to sit home in Cheminising, where I live at, and not be there for her. And I had a traditional gift for her, and I'm going to go down and see my daughter graduate. I was hoping that this would be in a large gymnasium where I could sneak in and actually observe this amazing accomplishment of getting her high school diploma. To my surprise, at Anoka Hennepin, it was a very small classroom, and there was no way I could sneak in. But I was able to at least sit in the hallway and see through the doorway. And I got to see my Nada walking proud, strong, Native young woman, getting her high school diploma on her own. And it was a great moment. But I knew what she wanted. I went downstairs. I found the principal of her alternative school there at the college and said, I am Nada's father. I have a traditional gift for her. Can you please give it to her and just tell her I was here? And I headed back up to Cheminising District, Isle, where I live at, up Highway 65. And I was probably just past Cambridge when my daughter Nada texted me, because the kids don't call their parents anymore, and just let me know to say, Dad, if I knew you were there, I wanted you to see me graduate. And my daughter's life started to go in a very good direction. She actually found full-time employment. She actually had a very nice young man in her life. And when she turned 20, she wanted to get together with her and I and just have a very nice dinner together for her 20th birthday. And my daughter was truly a foodie at heart. And we went in Maple Grove, Minnesota. It was a Brazilian steakhouse. If you know those are, it's gluttony on a stick. But we had a wonderful meal, and truly one of those beautiful father-daughter talks that come so rare in our lives. And as we were about to leave, my daughter just said, Dad, I want to tell you one more thing. And my daughter Nada said, Dad, the only reason I am alive is because of you. For everything I did for you to give up on me, you never did. And that is words I will never forget in my life as her father. Her life was going very well. For all the trauma that she has survived, being human trafficked and just trying to live life, it was going well for her. And we were so watching her grow, and where her life was going was a good one. Until the morning of May 26, 2021, when my life changed. I was just about to get off shift, and we had a house fire here on the reservation. I got on scene, and like we do, incident commander I did the 360. I looked at smoke conditions. It was an abandoned house. I gave Garrison Fire Department, who was coming down, a good fire report, where the fire hydrant was, what kind of smoke it was, what kind of building construction it was. And, we got down there, we were putting the fire out, and then my ex-wife started to text me and it's like, hey, call home, call home, call home. It's like, this is not the time I want to be talking to you. And, I'm like, not good. And got the fire out. We were doing overhaul. We got all the hose back up in the engines. And it's about 9:20 at night. And my daughter, Lanicia, Nada's sister, texts me and says, Dad, call home. It's an emergency. So I was able to call home. And one of the toughest jobs we have in the fire service and EMS service is we have to tell families when their loved ones have died. And everybody on this podcast, and I'm pretty sure yourself sitting there in your area, have had to do this gut-wrenching decision to tell somebody that their loved one has died in a fire or medical. And what I heard on the end of that phone was exactly what you and I and many on this podcast have heard. The screaming, the yelling, the wailing, the swearing, not making sense. And when I heard that on my end of my phone, my response to my ex-wife and to my daughter was, she's dead, isn't she? And I basically got a yes. I went lights and siren in my buggy to the residence. And unfortunately, what we do so well in the fire service and EMS world is muscle memory. We go into, how do we deal with this? And we just figured out, I had no idea what happened. But I knew that we had to start our traditional Ojibwe 4-day funeral process. I had to get a spiritual advisor for this. My daughter's, again, her traditional name of Fierce Passionate Woman is, I needed a fierce, strong Native woman to guide her spirit for the 4 days of our traditional funeral process. And I just knew the one I wanted to ask, which is Babata Boyd. I called her on her phone. I told her that my daughter was murdered, and I would like to offer her Asema tobacco to be our spiritual advisor and to guide us in her spiritual journey. Which most of this I knew because I had been through so many funerals in my time at the Mille Lacs Band, because that's what we do. We support our families. We support our relatives. The next call was to a good friend of mine at the Minnewacan Public Safety named Greg Hayes. He has now left that, working for the Metropolitan EMS group in the Twin Cities. Now, this is about 11 o'clock at night. And I just said, Greg, I need your help. My daughter's murdered, and I need you to let our brothers and sisters in fire, EMS, and emergency management know. I need 6 Ojibwe male men or Native men pallbearers. and all of the northern Ojibwe nations in Minnesota have Ojibwe emergency managers who could be the pallbearers. And Greg, being Greg, just said, "My brother, we've got you. Take care of your family. We'll take care of you." And certain things had to be done. A spirit fire had to be made, and which burns for 4 days, 24/7. That was brought to my house to do that. When my daughter's body was brought back up from Brooklyn Park, where she was murdered at, and the following day, I was able to finally talk to the investigator. It was a call of a barricaded suspect in a Brooklyn Park apartment, and officers had tried to enter the door of the apartment, couldn't get in, and left them no other option but to use their SWAT team and to actually breach the window of my daughter's, ground floor apartment. And what they found inside was a murder-suicide. My daughter had been shot 3 times in the chest with a modified AR-15 rifle with a full magazine of 30 rounds. The suspect, I did not know who the suspect was. His name was Darnell. What I found out later was a young man or who she was seeing, which I did not know about. And after he murdered my daughter, he took the rifle and then killed himself with the same rifle. And that's what I knew. Her body was eventually brought back up to Chiminising Isle, and we had to do certain things to prepare her for her journey. We actually had to wash her body with cedar water, as we do as Ojibwe people, preparing her body for her travel to the spirit world. And, the funeral home does what funeral home directors do and say, are you prepared for this? Because, she has bullet holes. And I'm like, been there, seen that, done it. And when we started to wash her, obviously we could tell that she was shot at close range, because it was a very simple through and through with no large back damage in her back when she was murdered to do that. When the third night came, which is the night of the wake, is as we're preparing, the Chiminising Center where I live at was under construction, and our District 2 representative, Marvin Bruno, was just a most wonderful district rep who I've known with all of my service for Mille Lacs. And he called me and said, "I know that the Chiminising Center we live at is being under construction. I would like to offer you the Minnesota District 2 East Lake Center up by McGregor." And actually, that was really where it was meant to be. That is where I have brought my girls, my daughters, to what we call ceremonial drum in the spring and the fall. My district where I live at does not have those. So spiritually, it was absolute right place to have it. When I walked in to that community center for the wake, Greg did exactly what Greg does to notify our brothers and sisters. When I walked in, every chair was filled with relatives, with friends, with co-workers, and more importantly, with uniforms. Rows and rows of brothers and sisters in uniforms. I will also tell you in the process, when you have to wake up your parents at 11:30 at night and try to tell them that their granddaughter at 24 was murdered, it is a very heart-wrenching thing to do. Because when you have hearing issues, you have memory issues, and you have to repeat and repeat and repeat that their beautiful granddaughter is dead, and trying to have them comprehend. But when they do, and they have a role to play during the funeral also. But during the wake, not only was there uniforms of our brothers and sisters, again, what I asked Greg to ask them is to bring food, because we have to feed everyone at the wake. We have to feed and eat with my daughter's spirit on the third night of the wake. The following day of the funeral, the process kind of follows again, where we have to eat together and then send her spirit off. Everything in this process is done in our traditional Ojibwe language, as Babata does, which was, I will tell you, a big challenge for all the responders, and because they're going, everything was in Ojibwe, and they were trying to follow what was happening. But again, this is in our language, not English. When the funeral was done, Babata, being Babata, is an amazing storyteller too. And what she did then was to bring a chair out and sit in front of everyone in that center. And as we say, she told the legend story of our funeral and why we do this and why it became what it is. But the one thing she told everybody, all our brothers and sisters from fire, EMS, and emergency management who were attending, and she said, once I send Monte's daughter, Native Spirit, to the place that we call the place of everlasting happiness, our grieving is done. So on the fourth day, the grieving is done. Her body is a shell. Her spirit is now in this place of everlasting happiness. All her trauma is gone. She is meeting relatives from thousands of years who have been waiting to welcome her to that beautiful place. And that is one thing that stuck with so many of our brothers and sisters in the fire and EMS and emergency management service, was the fact that the fourth day it is done. And when Rich Gasaway did our podcast together on his podcast, that is the one point that he said too was just beautiful to to listen to and understand. Where in dominant society we grieve for 10 years, we go on for years, and the fourth day we're done. This happened Memorial Day weekend, and on Tuesday I went back to work. And there were many co-workers who were non-native who just said, what are you doing being at work? You buried your daughter yesterday. But in our process, her spirit has left to a beautiful place. And as we say in our traditional teachings, that if we continue to grieve, her spirit won't be happy where she's at, and it will want to come back. So we have to let her go. And that was something where many of the non-native responders just are the most memorable piece of that funeral process, was how we end our grieving with that. But I'll tell you that, like we do in our services, afterwards, they were there for me in my darkest times. They just, hey, how you doing? All that. But my life moved on. But I do remember one important piece of her funeral. And that is my father, who was suffering from the effects of Alzheimer's, was able to come for his granddaughter's funeral and the wake in the funeral. When he arrived at the Missinukkwang Center, he did not want to get out of the car. He did not know where he was. I told the two ladies at the center, Morningstar and Renee, that if he comes in, just gently guide him to the front with us and have him sit with us, which he eventually did. But on his own, my father walked to the casket of his beautiful granddaughter, and he spent 20 minutes with her, telling her how beautiful she was, how much he loved her. And in that moment, even with his Alzheimer's, he had a spiritual connection to her. And I was so lucky to see that. Once we buried my daughter in our Chiminsing cemetery, all these advocates who I have known and worked with during my daughter's time of being human trafficked and during the wake and the funeral approached me and said, Monte, when you are ready, you have to tell your daughter's story. My daughter's dream and hope was that she wanted to get an education and help other Native women who were human trafficked. That was her passion, and that's what she wanted to do. And her life of 24 years did not allow her to do that. And all these strong Indigenous women advocates in the missing and murdered Indigenous women's movement said, you have to be her passion. Don't let her death be a check in a box. Because in this epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and relatives, who do we see and hear on the front lines? We hear and see the grandmothers. We see the mothers. We see the aunties. We see the sisters. We see the cousins. Who we don't see is the Native fathers. And especially ones who have a career of tribal public safety and service like you. Because it says this epidemic can happen to any Native family. It isn't, it's that type of Native family. It's that urban Native family. This epidemic can happen to any Native family, even one who's a brother in the fire, EMS, and emergency services world. During this time of my daughter's murder and her funeral, news was being made in Utah that there was a non-native young lady who was missing in Utah, and supposedly the boyfriend was involved. This non-native young lady search was given 2 weeks of 24/7 coverage on the news. Every major news network showed that this non-native young woman was missing in Utah. They had the FBI involved in this. They had multiple agencies searching for this, and it was relentless for 2 weeks. My daughter Nada's life of 24 years was worth 9.5 minutes of media time. Basically showing the SWAT team breaching her apartment and then identifying the deceased afterwards. What I didn't know until Richard Gasaway's podcast is that the Brooklyn Park fire chief at the time, John Cunningham, who I've known over 25 years, was one of the incident commanders on scene. And when we were doing that podcast, and when the bodies were identified, John was just so caring. And he said, Monte, it had to be your daughter. By the description and the last name, I couldn't think of whose other daughter this could be. And I just couldn't do much because I knew what it was going to do to you. My journey wasn't done yet. I then had to go and clean out her apartment. I needed to see where my daughter's life ended. And I, through Brooklyn Park Fire Department, was offered several fire crews to help clean out her apartment. One of the things we have to do as Ojibwe people during a passing or a death is we have to give away everything of that person. So that was my job. Luckily, I did find, actually, I had a high school classmate who I have not spoken about in about 30 years, actually runs a service to help clean out homes of elderly parents and things. And she called and offered her team to come down and help me out, which I very much accepted. Getting into my daughter's apartment, when the gunfire erupted, multiple shots from the AR-15 rifle not only killed my daughter, but actually put many holes in the walls and the ceilings of this first floor apartment. And why nobody else was injured or killed is beyond me. But it did open up, but did strike several of the water pipes. And so everything inside my daughter's apartment was soaked with things. But we bagged everything up and donated everything that needed to be donated. But I did know from the investigator that the suspect, Darnell, his mother was calling to request Darnell's clothing and other personal items that were in the apartment. And the investigator from Brooklyn Park said, "You want me to call the mom?" And I'm like, "Nope, I'll call. So I called Darnell's mother. And when she picked up the phone, I just said, "This is Monte. I'm Nada's father. I know you want Darnell's things. And what do you say to the mother of the young man who killed your daughter. But as Ojibwe people, being compassionate, humble is part of who we are. And I just said, we both lost our children. And we both have to live with that fact. But I said, I do have your son's stuff here. You're allowed to come in the apartment and pick it up to do, what you need to do with it. And after that happened, one realizes that the funeral that a victim receives, as in my daughter, traditional 4-day Ojibwe funeral to send her to the spirit world, is one thing. But we also know that the funeral for the perpetrator looks and feels a whole lot different. So this is my journey. I then have now been going out and speaking about this, because as the advocates say, don't let her death be a check in the box, be her passion. And when I meet in these travels and these story times, when I meet so many other Native families, as strange or as hard as it is to hear this, so many of them say to me, do you know how lucky you are? Because you know where your daughter is at, which is she is buried right across from my house in Chiminising in our traditional cemetery. There are so many Native families across the United States. We have 580 federally recognized tribes. We have large urban Native populations whose loved ones have been missing 5, 10, 15, 20 years with no answers. They live every single day wondering what happened to their relatives. And when I look at we in the fire service, we in fire-based EMS and emergency management, we have a critical role in this epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. Because think of all the contacts that we make for all the medicals we respond to maybe house fires where we have fire victims and we're doing overhaul and trying to provide food and shelter for them. Think about during incidences which we're sheltering people. We in the fire and EMS and emergency management world have a role now because we are reading stories where our brothers and sisters are coming into contact with victims of human trafficking. And for those brothers and sisters in the fire and EMS and emergency management world who reside close to one of our tribal nations, who have large urban Native populations, my hope is when I tell this story is that next month is that you will be there to bring that awareness of this epidemic to your training sessions for your departments, for your EMS crews, and for others. To say we provide service to a Native community, whether on reservation or in our urban areas. And we just might be the agency that saves an Indigenous man or woman's life from human trafficking or worse, because we come in contact with them during our responses for customer service, for medicals or fires or during incidences. So it's a role, and my role I have right now is one I'm honored to do for my daughter. But I also know that there is going to be another Native family or a Native responder who is going to be their child, their relative. And it'll be their time to tell their stories to others. And my daughter's story can rest. So, from the bottom of my heart, I thank Tailboard Talk for the gift of honoring my daughter, Aqua Dizi Nishka Ishkadit Ikwe, a fierce, passionate woman, or in her English name, Monte Fronk. You have not let her memory die. And I hope this story helps others who provide service to tribal communities or our urban Native populations, as you do in Fargo-Moorhead. So with that, we say miigwech, we say thank you. And thank you for honoring my daughter.
Thank you for listening to Tailboard Talk. Don't forget to tune in each week, Monday through Friday, 5:30 p.m. Eastern, 8:30 p.m. Pacific for Fire Engineering Talk Radio. You can also subscribe to all of our shows on iTunes. Just search for Fire Engineering Talk Radio. Check out our educational programs and consultation services. They're all available at tailboardconsulting.com. There you can find links to all of our shows and our magazine articles. Thanks for listening, and join us again next month for another episode of Tailboard Talk on Fire Engineering Talk Radio.
Like a trusted turnout jacket you've had for years, Flex 7 outer shell fabric delivers a perfectly broken-in feel on the very first wear. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of enforced technology, Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit tenkatafabrics.com/flex7. Flex 7, powered by enforced technology, only from Tenkata Protective Fabrics.